Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion on reclaiming the arts in global public education, which Alliance is hosting in partnership with the Community Arts Network. We're delighted to have you all with us this afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Elika Ruhi. I'm the managing editor at Alliance Magazine. The arts hold huge untapped potential. They can unlock pathways beyond the reach of traditional approaches. They can help us rebuild beyond our divisions and restore our human connection. With the arts, we are able to shift perspectives, influence behavior, and evoke empathy, the emotional foundation of meaningful, lasting social transformation. The arts are not just peripheral, but they are a powerful driver of social impact and one of the major levers of change in shaping the place and role of arts in society is the public education system. We're going to be exploring this in more depth, and I'm pleased to be joined by a panel of experts that is thinking about this topic this afternoon. And I would like to introduce Werner Bachstein, the director of the Community Arts Lab by Porticus and chairman of the Community Arts Network, Samar Bandak, the managing director and co-lead of the Community Arts Network, Hedy Lahman, an assistant professor and co-director of international education at New York University, and Yasmani Arboleda, the Community Arts Network senior artistic advisor and New York City's inaugural People's Artist at the Civic Engagement Commission. Welcome, everyone. Before we jump into the conversation, just a few housekeeping notes. So please go ahead and say hello in our chat, which you should be able to see in the bottom right of your screen. We'll also be taking audience questions today, so make sure you think about your questions and put them in the Slido app, which you should be able to see if you're in the chat, or if you can't, there should be something on the bottom right that says all apps if you hover above it. It's three squares and a plus sign, and then you should be able to see Slido in there. So go ahead and think about what you want to ask our panelists and put it into the Slido app. Everyone attending this event today is entitled to a 20% discount on an Alliance subscription. An Alliance subscription gives you access to exclusive subscriber content, 4 issues of the magazine a year, and free access to all of our future events. We will be putting the subscriber code in the chat, and we will also be sending it out by email afterwards. Now on to the main event. Werner, we're going to turn first to you, and you're going to give us an introduction about the work of the Community Arts Lab and Community Arts Network, as well as some of the work of both organizations. So please take it away.
Thank you so much, Elika. I'm happy to start this off, although it's a clear focus. This is the last slide, maybe the first slide, if you can go to the first slide. Yeah, thank you so much. I think my job is really to bring in the larger picture where we are at from a CAL's perspective or the Community Arts Network perspective and by Porticus. So if you want to the larger journey, but of course it always starts with a very personal journey. And maybe next slide, which is a beautiful quote by Socrates, wisdom begins in wonder. And actually, when I think back where I'm born into a small village, where art at that time for me was not part of my life. That was for the others. That was something, for those who would attend festivals and things. And we didn't even think about arts. The only thing what we did in our family, we were singing together and very joyful. But the art was something which was not accessible. It was really for the ones who had the means to be part of that game, if you want so. And even if we'd have had the money, like my mother could maybe bought me a ticket for an event, but then what would I wear? It's not my thing. It's not my club. And I felt like that's for others, not for us. It took actually an Iranian guy who at that time came to my region and he brought us onto stage. We played West Side Story. And that was the moment where I realized being on stage, seeing the light, being equal, with the others, feeling that bond, feeling that immense beauty that I could express myself, that we could express together ourselves, that I really captured the real power of arts as a transformative force. And later on in my life, I was lucky to start some of these kind of initiatives. Maybe we go to the next slide. So that was my personal journey. But then way forward, 2016, within Porticus Foundation, we were lucky that we could start a new unit, which we named Community Arts Lab. It's actually a funding unit, a special unit within Porticus Foundation, where we were really on a trial mode. We supported many initiatives in the field of artistic practices for individual and community well-being, mainly in the performative arts field, music field, but then also we supported a lot of theater production, for instance, when we worked with the Truth Commission in Colombia, or we brought back or tried to bring back with, of course, always local partners, arts as a means, what we will hear today also as a means for social emotional learning into public education. And of course, we also tried to try in a way with others to build up a kind of movement. But we realized funding is one thing, but then when we did actually quite a big, extensive mapping, we asked the partners, what would you need? Those partners on the ground who would really work in the field. And they said, besides funding, they said, we need connections. We feel fragmented. We feel alone. And that was actually the starting point where we said, we need actually extra resources, not only on funding, but we need extra resources for building up connections between these initiatives, but also trying to support them in visibility, trying and enable them, but also again in advocacy. And all this, and that's maybe to the next slide, all on this we said, we realized looking, even though we have done this, another foundation obviously also invested into, this field is still underfunded. It's still not really seen. The full power of the arts is not yet seen. People talk about it also because of climate issues and things, but it's not really acknowledged and it's not invested into. It needs more visibility and we should be a bit more bold. And that is why we are now building up a new initiative, and maybe to the last slide, under the title or under the motto reclaiming the power of the arts for collective well-being, believing that arts is maybe the reconnector of huge divides to ourselves, in ourselves, divides with others, and also in the environment. And we have learned that we have to do minimum these three things. We have to mobilize resources for the sector, so still bring in funding and re-granting. That's the first pillar. The second pillar, we feel there are incredible initiatives out there. That's nothing new, but they are not connected. How can we support these connections and be a bit of a weaver in that field? Rather, it's not about us, it's really about the field, ecosystem building. And the third pillar, what can we do to really shift narrative, to organize experience for people that they truly believe that art is not this luxury and commodity thing, the thing which we can fund if there is some money left in the afternoon volunteer programs, but rather to core invest, core believe in, and see arts as this common denominator and language. And maybe my last thing before we start and I hand over is, in this whole journey, and I guess it's for many working in that field the same thing, we are always in a defensive position. We are defending it all the time. We have to defend it in front of the boards. We have to still defend it in the philanthropy sector. And then it's interesting that our colleagues in the impact field, they would even talk about these things. They would talk about, when they talk about impact models, they talk about, we have to first, preconditions are good relationship. Preconditions are that we shift our mindsets. But they don't think about the arts. How do they do it? I asking my colleagues, if you really want to connect on a relational level, arts is maybe the best connector. If you really want to change mindsets, and I think also heart sets, art is maybe the biggest influencer into culture in these moral modes they are referring to. So my question is, why do we still have to defend it? I think we have to step up and not defend anymore and be bold. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Werner. Before we go on, I want to prompt the audience to think about how art plays a part in their own work. So please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. And then also, if you're willing to share a little bit about how art is a part of your own work at your own organizations. I want to turn now to Samar, who will share some background from margins to masterpieces, changing pathways to strengthen arts in global public education, which is research into the arts as a powerful driver for social impact. Samar, you're on mute.
Thank you, Alika. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you all today. And I would like to start by thanking Alliance Magazine for co-hosting this webinar and for all the preparations the team has done. And before we get into the report's findings with Dr. Hadi Lahman, I would like to give you a flavor of the thinking and intentions behind this report. So this report was commissioned by both Community Arts Lab by Porticus and the Community Arts Network. And while it was partly about informing our own strategy and work, we had two bigger motivations. The first one we all know. Public education is the biggest vehicle in the world for children's development. And any changes in these systems could have a profound long-term impact on the future of learners who are future citizens, on the future of our society, and of course, in our case and our topic today, the future of the arts. And sadly, we became aware of a steady global decline, severe decline in arts education in public classrooms in recent decades. But, and here comes the second motivation, in the midst of this, we also witnessed organization defying the difficult conditions with minimal resources coming up with creative, context-adaptable models to bring back arts into national education at scale. And we wanted with this report to spotlight these models as lighthouses within the sector. Our goal with this report is, or was, to create the most up-to-date and well-informed case possible for the arts in public education, so we can contribute a little bit to supporting the challenging work and mission of those dedicated to the cause. So the report is intended to serve a global public good. We published it last year, and we hope, and we already knew, and we're so happy for this, that it is used, and we hope it will be used as a tool, a reference, as an inspiration, and more a roadmap for action. We need action by those working in arts education specifically, but also in arts in general. Because even though education is the central focus of this report, we have received a lot of feedback that many of the findings resonate far beyond education and offer a strong foundation for broader advocacy for the arts in society. You will hear this in a moment from our Dr. Hadi Lahman, who led this project, joining us on a critical learning journey and has become a team member and a friend in the process. She has enriched this report with her creatively combined character, both as an artist herself and a researcher in international education at New York University. The process was rigorous and lengthy. Rigorous because you will also hear it had a desk review, interviews, survey, and peer reviews. And was also lengthy because we were intentional to include as many diverse voices as possible, trying to represent the various geographies, context, and a wide variety of stakeholders, ranging from UNESCO and government ministers to practitioners and community-led projects on the ground. We are deeply grateful to each and everyone contributed to this collective effort. Finally, on a personal note, and I want to echo, it's very similar to how Werner ended his talk as well. As much as I'm proud, and we are all proud of this piece of work, there is a touch of bitterness, again, by the reality that we continue to spend so much time, energy, and resources on defending the value of the arts. And on top, often those defenses have to be framed around how arts support something else, like well-being, social cohesion, economy, education, rather than being recognized also for their own intrinsic value and worth. Of course, this debate connects to deeper and more fundamental questions about what education is really for and what kind of society we aspire to build. And these questions, to be honest, are now relevant more than ever in our unsettled and overwhelming times. We need something that can speak to our whole selves, not only the rational, the emotional, the spiritual, and beyond, and embrace our complex reality. We believe that art is a powerful vehicle and force for this. And this report is our testament and also our invitation for all of you to join us on this mission. Thank you. Back to you, Alika.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Samar. It was great to hear a little bit about the thinking behind the report. And now I want to turn to Hedy, who is the author of the report, and she's going to explore some of the highlights that the research has.
Thank you, Alika. Thank you, Samar, Werner, Yasmani, and the organizers for today. It's such a pleasure to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm in New York. It's bright and early here. Yes, so thank you again to Community Arts Network Alliance Magazine for bringing us together. As you've heard, I'm going to be sharing lessons from this global study that asks, why are the arts being pushed to the margins of public education? And I'm going to extend that to societies as well in this talk. And then what can we do to reclaim them? And I will follow suit with others. Before I speak as the researcher here, I want to start as a child in the classroom. So my own beginnings, I was really shy as a kid. And the first time that I had an opportunity to perform in a drama classroom, and I experienced my peers erupting in laughter and applause, I felt like I was suddenly no longer invisible. In that drama classroom, I found my voice, and it felt like a secret superpower. And years later, of course, I had to become an actor after that experience, and then a teaching artist. And then after that, a PhD student researching the arts in Afghanistan. And at that time, I again experienced this moment of witnessing the power of the arts, creating moments of connection and laughter in a country that was deeply scarred by decades of war. And so these experiences have convinced me that the arts are not a luxury, they are a right, and they're a right for everyone, and a right that is deeply connected to our well-being and our humanity. The next slide, please. So this conviction is certainly connected to the study that I'll be talking about. So From Margins to Masterpieces, as you've heard, was commissioned by the Community Arts Network and Porticus. It set out to identify the bottlenecks, the levers of change, the scalable opportunities for strengthening arts in public education globally. And again, as you've heard, we focus deliberately on public schools because they are the broadest and most equitable infrastructure that we have. So public schools remain one of the few universal institutions that still reach entire communities offline across lines of difference. If the arts aren't embedded in public schools, access remains fragile and tied to privilege. So this study draws on insights from a desk review, from 53 interviews, from 95 surveys across 55 countries, with voices from governments, schools, and arts organizations. Next slide, you can see a map that illustrates the countries represented in this study. We made deliberate efforts to make sure that we weren't trying to tell a global story just from the lens of the global north. This is really a first of its kind study to capture such a breadth of perspectives on arts education in low and middle income countries. And on the next slide, before I turn to the bottlenecks and the levers of change, I'm going to talk about these shared rationales that I heard from participants. So I'm not presenting new causal evidence here, but conveying a kind of global consensus about why this matters for healthy children and healthy societies. Now on the next slide, you'll see that participants consistently pointed to 4 rationales for why the arts matter. And the first one is the rationale that education policy makers like best academic outcomes. Yes, the arts do improve engagement in school, even performance in other subjects. But if that is the whole story, the arts risk being valued instrumentally and only through the kinds of standardized metrics and rankings that often fail to capture some of the most meaningful contributions that the arts have to offer to human development, to child development, to society. So I'm going to focus more on the other 3 here that speak more directly to well-being and social connection and the kinds of healthy societies that the arts make possible. So on the next slide, the role of arts in supporting well-being is well known. The arts amplify schools' protective role, foster belonging. They give children safe spaces to navigate emotions and tough experiences. As Jordan's former cultural minister quoted on this slide said, "Education is a journey." She emphasized the need for schools to support our students to be happy human beings who celebrate our shared humanity. And schools can really be anchors within communities, and the arts can turn those spaces into bridges that really foster cohesion, connection across divides. On the next slide, the director for the CLICE organization described how in rural Colombia, decades of conflict gave way to celebration when school arts programs revived traditional dances and organized festivals. She said it was the first time that communities that had been at war for so long reclaimed their common traditions and celebrated together. And also emphasized that you cannot get that from mathematics and social sciences alone. On the next slide, we often hear about the arts cultivating these 21st century skills, creativity, problem solving, critical thinking. These are the skills that the labor market really prioritizes. And these are the very skills that healthy democracies can't survive without. So the former Minister of Education in Portugal, quoted on this slide, said, "Arts education is critical for human development, especially in the times we are living. In the time of fake news and attacks on democracy, the arts wake us up, and they remind us that alternative futures are possible." So move to the next slide. If the case is so strong, why do the arts so often remain on the margins of public education and at a higher level of societies? On the next slide, across these 55 countries, a critical gap is evident that despite the arts' clear social value, they remain a low priority. And there's kind of 5 key problems that I highlight in this study. Funding, of course, for the arts, it's often the first thing to be cut and the last thing to be restored. At the same time, you have this growing pressure around standardized testing, ranking, and accountability. This, of course, pulls time and attention away from the arts in schools. Even where strong policies exist, they're often unsupported in practice. And over time, capacity gaps in things like teacher training, these weaken the broader ecosystem itself. And then underneath all of this is really a perception problem. So many societies still see arts as a luxury rather than as essential to education, to well-being, to our humanity. On the next slide, this study also surfaced levers of change, points where transformation is possible. Next slide. One of the clearest themes that emerged is the need to shift from proof on paper to what I'm calling the evidence of experience. So again and again, I heard a similar sentiment from participants that change begins when communities and families and policymakers and funders encounter the arts firsthand. On the next slide, I have a series of quotes for you. One educator in China described bringing teachers and principals and district leaders to student showcases, explaining that once they see it, they feel it, they get it. And he said that after one performance, a district leader turned to him and said, "Drama education is so important. In fact, it's crucial." A similar story emerged in South Africa, where an arts practitioner described fathers seeing their daughters perform on stage for the first time and witnessing this extraordinary power, voice, and physical projection. And at times, these fathers were moved to tears because they had never seen their daughters occupy space in that way before. And Werner, who's with us today, may have captured this idea most directly in our interview when he said, at the end of the day, they, being the donors and the stakeholders, came to one performance. They heard one story that the parents told them and they financed it. And they never even asked afterward about an impact report. In a modern way, evidence is just to witness, to observe rigor by talking to parents and to children. So these moments of experience, they can shift mindsets about the value of the arts, and they can mobilize support in game-changing ways. On the next slide, we're going to go back to our levers of change. So a second lever that emerged was the importance of partnerships. Participants highlighted how partnerships bridge gaps in funding, in training, in technical support, and in broader community engagement. I've got some more quotes for you on the next slide. So in India, the founder of Nalanda Way described the reality that governments often move slowly, making partnerships essential for piloting ideas, for demonstrating what's possible, until governments could meet them halfway and come along as long-term partners. And then in Portugal, schools were required to build cultural plans that included partnerships with local artists and local institutions. So these partnerships often connected them with arts organizations right across the street that they had never previously engaged with. So together, these examples highlight the importance of partnerships, not just as funding mechanisms, but as essential connectors that can strengthen access, they can strengthen trust, and they can strengthen long-term sustainability. Let's go back to our levers of change on the next slide. The third lever that emerged was the importance of knowledge sharing and advocacy in order to shift broader narratives around the arts across contexts. And this is where regional and global networks, along with intergovernmental organizations, play a very important role. On the next slide, so the first quote on this slide highlights the influence of these big organizations like UNESCO and OECD helping elevate arts education as legitimizing it as a global priority. And the second quote points to the importance of educating communities about the connection of arts education to the future of cultural and creative industries. So this is an increasingly important conversation that's happening globally. There's a lot of momentum here, including within the G20 agenda about stimulating cultural and creative economies. So these examples show that change happens not just through these exemplary arts programs, but through shifting broader narratives, through networks, through conversations at the policy level, at the community level, to shape how societies understand the value of the arts and the structural supports that are built around them. And on the next slide, we're going to move to some of these, what some are called the lighthouses. This study surfaced a number of global models. This is not an exhaustive list, but snapshots of examples that show what's possible. So on the next slide, there are a number of national models that were captured in the full report, from government-led initiatives to arts organization partnerships, illustrating these different resourceful pathways for embedding arts into public life through collaboration, through training, through technical support, through strengthening that community infrastructure. So a few examples on the next slide, again, not an exhaustive list. I've already shared a little bit about the Portugal example, so I'm not going to speak further about that one here. But the next example in Kenya, the Art of Music Foundation establishes these arts education hubs within communities. And these hubs are spaces where teachers get trained and they can build capacity within low resource areas. In Argentina and India, arts organizations featured here partner with education and health systems, so supporting your well-being, social emotional learning and inclusion. And in Jordan, Madrasati organization combines curriculum reform, teacher training, advocacy, technical support to create school spaces that support social cohesion, and particularly within divided communities. So all of this points to an important opportunity for philanthropy, not simply funding isolated programs, but building bridges across sectors, across institutions, across communities in ways that can help arts initiative not only grow, but sustain over time. So on the next slide, I will close with a few recommendations. One clear finding from this research is that some of the most impactful arts initiatives emerge where partnerships fill gaps that governments often cannot. So supporting experimentation and innovation and scaling promising models across sectors. Another takeaway is the importance of the evidence of experience, direct exposure to the arts. This can shift perceptions often more powerfully than statistics or policy reports can alone. And this suggests the need not only to invest in partnerships that support exemplary, strong arts programs, but in community arts experiences that give communities the opportunity, that give policymakers the opportunities, that funders the opportunities to encounter the arts firsthand themselves. Connected to that, we see the value of leveraging exemplary schools, cultural institutions, organizations, and utilizing them as hubs for outreach and for peer learning and inclusive access. And finally, we need broader ways of understanding impact. Not all meaningful outcomes of the arts can be captured through standardized metrics alone. Philanthropy can help advance more art-specific approaches and frameworks that value process, that value reflection, that value participation, while also strengthening the broader knowledge sharing ecosystem. So in short, reclaiming the arts means pulling every lever we have, from the local to the regional to the global. And on the next slide, at the end of the day, this isn't about enrichment. This research ultimately suggests that the arts aren't peripheral to healthy societies. They're part of the infrastructure that makes healthy societies possible. And that's why the arts belong not at the margins, but at the heart of public life. And on the last slide, I will just say thank you for your time and the work that you're all doing to advance the arts for a healthier world. I'm excited to learn more and chat more with everyone.
Thank you so much, Hedy. It was really interesting to hear some of the highlights that came out of the research that you've conducted for this report. And I was really struck by this idea that keeps coming up again and again in our conversation so far, that the arts are right. They're not a luxury. They're not at the margins. They really belong at the center of everything. And I can see a lot of things in the chat of many of the people that are here today talking about actually how that is really playing out in their own work and their own organizations around the world. I just want to remind everyone that we are going to be taking audience questions. So if you have a question that you're really keen to ask our panelists, please go ahead and put it in the chat or in the Slido, which you should be able to access either above or below your chat. For me, it's under show apps. So go ahead and dig around for it and then put a question in there and we'll get to it in a little bit. But before that, last but not least, I want to turn to Yasmani, who is going to speak from the perspective of the artists that are involved in this work.
Thank you so much. I think this is also this is my last slide. One back, one more. Okay, let's. All right. I will begin by sharing with you that I believe that the arts are critical. My own life practice over the last 25 years, working across different municipalities and working across different communities, has shown me this. This proposition is critical. The idea that public life is designed, democracy is designed, belonging is designed, and if systems can be designed to isolate people, they can also be redesigned to reconnect them. My work through the People's Creative Institute and the New York Civic Engagement Commission asks what happens when artists are involved not simply in decorating civic systems, but in helping redesign how people experience democracy itself. We can go on to the next slide. I often think about the artist Maro Lederman Iquiles, who became the first artist in residence with the New York City Department of Sanitation in the 1970s. She shook the hands of thousands of sanitation workers as she looked into their eyes and she said, "Thank you so much for making our city possible." She believed that this art practice was maintenance and that this work was sacred. She fundamentally expanded the definition of public art through this gesture and through her work. She understood something profound. Art is not separate from civic systems. Art can transform how society values people. I mean, this is echoing many of the things Hedy and Samar shared. We'll go to the next slide. The Civic Engagement Commission was created to strengthen democracy in New York City. By strengthening democracy is not only procedural work, it is emotional work, it is cultural work, it is relational work. For example, when I first came into the agency, even though everyone identified as liberal, people couldn't agree to say the words Black Lives Matter in public as a team of 8 people in the city of New York in 2020. And so the work became identifying the values we say we espouse in our work. And so, for example, we thought about the notion of, oh, what can we learn from in nature that can support the way we think about the design of our work? And so accountability, accessibility, collaboration, imagination, these are all part of a kind of filter system for how we think about how to prioritize what is most critical for the residents of New York City we're meant to be serving. And we asked the question, what would happen if government communicated less like bureaucracy and more like culture? We can go to the next slide. One of the earliest projects was transforming a retired Rikers Island corrections bus into the People's Bus. A vehicle once associated with incarceration became a mobile civic space for imagination, creativity, and democratic participation. This is not just adaptive reuse, it was narrative repair. I mean, if we think about it, back in 2020, we had millions of people in New York City protesting police brutality. And so this was a critical thing to think, gosh, how do we address this challenge given what's happening? Next slide. So these are my sketches. I think of my drawings as illustrations that possibly show us what the future could look like. And so taking a corrections bus from Rikers Island and transforming it into a theater that moves around New York City and performs. Here, what we're looking at is the set of In the Heights. In the Heights, in one of our neighborhoods in Uptown New York. And this is again, this was the pandemic. So to think through, how do we think about hybrid systems that could lead to transforming our assumptions about what's possible and how we find health and healing with each other. Next slide. And so what you see here are Mujeres en Movimiento. It's a group of women from Queens, from our borough in Queens. And these are all undocumented women who came into the fold of the work, getting paid $20 an hour to use more than 8.8 million recycled glass beads to create the interior of the People's Bus. And so I always talk about not only is the outcome artful, the process and the way that we make the work happen is also essentially beautiful. And this is a way of thinking that is central to the kind of work that we do. Next slide. Another aspect that was really critical to us is to we invited more than 2,000 New Yorkers to learn how to rank choice vote by telling us what they thought the bus should become. And so early on, we said, should the People's Bus be a kitchen, a pantry? Should it be a place for people experiencing homelessness to take a shower? What kind of things do we want to prioritize in our city that need to be mobile? And what we ended up with was a kind of performance-based theatrical place where people could tell stories. That's what more than I think more than 1,200 people voted for that specifically. Next slide. And so this is the People's Bus transformed. We could see it here. Wherever the People's Bus goes now, we hire artists to perform and to invite New Yorkers into workshops where they learn all kinds of things around participatory budgeting, social prescription, and other ways of connecting and taking care of each other more directly. Next slide. Through the process, we discovered that people participate differently when civic engagement feels human, when it feels joyful, when it feels culturally alive, when it invites wonder instead of compliance. I often think about the work of having government that is not focusing on operating under the notion of efficiency, control, and fear, and rather beauty, joy, and community. How would government feel if it invited all of us to really be? I always say, how can democracy be more like honey, sticky, sweet, delicious, embodied? And that to me is a really gorgeous way of having people think, gosh, it's not just an intellectual exercise. It's about how we feel together, how we move through the process of making decisions together. Next slide. And so this is Little Amal. We actually had the privilege of designing Little Amal's journey across New York City. We did more than 50 events where more than 100,000 New Yorkers walked along with Little Amal as she moved from neighborhood to neighborhood, inviting people to question and to think about more than the half of the world's displaced people are under the age of 18. So they're mostly children. How can we create empathy and an understanding of what the plight of those young people in the lives of New Yorkers? It was a huge part of the way we ask questions, like the questions we asked as we designed Little Amal's journey across the city. This is her in Grand Central Terminal, where the Women's Resistance Revival Chorus sang to her to show her the way. Next slide. This is Little Amal participating in our People's Money program, the citywide participatory budgeting project. Um, Public art changes who feels visible in society. It interrupts routine. It creates collective memory. It allows strangers to experience themselves as part of something shared. These projects are not simply performances, they're rehearsals for public belonging. If you go to the next slide, please. This is a drawing of the People's Bus becoming Tippy, the Tender People's Money Monster. In our participatory budgeting program, one of the things that we identify is that people are afraid of financing and understanding how to like budget. We talk a lot about financial literacy, and this is how we get New Yorkers, especially young ones, to come into the bus and learn about some of these elements as they're playing and learning with each other. Next slide. Here are folks feeding pizza, one of our, very iconic New York City staples of food. But again, this idea of like much of democracy today is structured around speaking, but very little is structured around listening, around reflection, around presence. Artists create spaces where people can encounter one another differently. Uh, I always think about joy as a value, but also as a strategy. We often underestimate the political power of play, especially in a time of exhaustion, fear, and polarization. Joy is not escapism. Joy is how communities rehearse possibility. Next slide. This is the People's Buzz out and about. You can see Tippy with Mr. Met, one of our mascots for the city of New York. Next slide. This is the People's Buzz at an event last year where we had some live performers performing to get out the vote. This was the National Get Out the National Voter Registration Day in September of 2025. Next slide. And then here we see we also we had the privilege of transforming the interior of the Civic Engagement Commission. This is an important piece because I often think people underestimate the environment in which we do the work. If the environment is beautiful, how does it change the work that's being done in those spaces? And so for me, when we had the opportunity to move into a new building, the opportunity to make that space really, really beautiful, to really encourage the people who work at the Civic Engagement Commission to see themselves in beautiful in a way that's dignified. I always say if you invite people into art practice, you're inviting their highest self to show up because you're inviting their imagination to contribute to the process. So next slide. This is the interior of the office. Of course, bright, colorful, all these things. I always say color is like it's a critical aspect of the process. I always talk about also the invitation to always think about meetings, having live music and having food, because then you create a place where people are enjoying making decisions together. It might sound simple, but it is really critical. Live music and food invite us into our senses, into memory. So I think that's really, really important. Next slide. Too often civic institutions are emotionally sterile, but but space teaches, color teaches, design teaches, participation teaches. So we should not only ask, how do we get people into democracy? We should ask, what kind of democracy are people entering into? If we go to the next slide. I believe that strongly that artists understand metaphor, and metaphor allows people to emotionally access systems that otherwise feel abstract or inaccessible. A giant puppet, next slide, with a heart in its chest can sometimes communicate more about civic care than 100 policy documents. These are the Sunnies, they're Sunshine Sentinels we created in 2024. We hired immigrant mothers to create hundreds of sculptures that represent Sunshine Sentinels that invite New Yorkers to participate in our citywide participatory budgeting program. And if you can go to the next slide, please. I'm a visual storyteller, so I always land on the side of more images than less, as you can tell. And here is a little bit of the process of these sculptures being made in our studio. Next slide. You can see folks making decisions and designing the process by which we get these sunnies out into the world. Next slide. For me, the intersection between public art and direct democracy is ultimately about one thing: helping people experience themselves as authors of public life. Democracy is not sustained by information alone, it is sustained by imagination, by ritual, by trust, by participation, by feeling that your presence matters. And I will finish with this story. This is one of the ads that appeared in the subway system in the trains here in New York City during the first year we used the Sunnies as our storytelling mechanism. And a 9-year-old girl named Sylvia, on her way home from work, who had been to our studio to meet her mother, where she was making the sculptures. On her way home, got to show her friends that her mom's work was on the subway walls. And when she got home to the shelter system that night, Sylvia said to her mom, "Oh my God, mom, I saw your work on the subway. You're famous. I can't believe we're in New York and we belong." And I think so often these are the stories that like really harken back to the fact that like art invites us all into dignity. It invites us all into care and to prioritize that which matters most. And so as an artist, for me, I think all of this research and Hetty's work and our team's evolution of like really centering this way of thinking about how to prioritize art is really central to the future of an earth that really centers the care and the respect for all living creatures in an ecosystem of care and beauty. So thank you for listening, and I'm really grateful to Alliance Magazine as well for giving us a space to share our stories.
Thank you so much, Yasmani. It's a joy to do a presentation or like do an event about art because we get a chance to see some beautiful art, and I'm sure you all find that in your work every day. We're going to turn now to audience questions. So if you have a question, please go ahead and submit it either in the chat or in the Slido. We have a question from EJ Jacobs. What role could the philanthropic community play beyond funding to explain the intersectional significance of supporting the arts in this moment? I want to turn first to Werner, if you have any thoughts on this question.
I think in general, when I look at the philanthropic field, very often there is still a lot of investment into institutions rather than infrastructure. And I think we all love in the philanthropy field our beloved initiatives and things like that. And I'm not saying we shouldn't support that, but I think there is so much needed more to let go of our ego and connect with others who are also working in that field. And I know it's not easy in the philanthropic field, because it's very often about what we are doing and what we are conveying and what we are supporting, but really to connect and collaborate and invest a lot in artist infrastructure. And that means also not only into institutions and connections, but it means also, as Hedy was referring to, cross-sectoral work, what Yasmani does, working with governments. Can we not address them? Can we not also work together? So beyond our borders, that we think we are the only one to invest into this. So I think we have to also connect our work with governmental work, for instance. It's one of the answers. I think it's way longer.
Thank you. Do any of the other panelists have some thoughts on this question? Great. Well, let's
briefly, very briefly, because I know we're running short on time. And this just follows everything that Werner said, but one of the recommendations that I kind of went through very quickly at the end is the importance of knowledge sharing. And this isn't just about sharing evidence, but also sharing best practices, philanthropic best practices, sharing with each other the ways that infrastructure is being supported, and the ways that we can make these connections that can support communities in partnering across sectors. And the more that we can share that knowledge, not just within our little spaces and our own context, but spread that out, the bigger role I think we can play and the more impact we can have in shifting the narrative around the importance of the arts.
I add one thing very fast. Also, allowing spaces to visit these initiatives, to experience in the field the art. So philanthropy can be contagious to other funders, invite them to feel and sense and experience the arts. And then, this is the way to convince, and this is the way. So another one as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Samar. We have a question from Felicity Jones, who I'm going to put this one to Yasmani. How many other cities have funded roles like yours? Does New York City have a partnership to support supporting other cultural organizations and philanthropy? You can share a bit about the model that you work with.
Yeah, in New York City, the model is called the Public Artist in Residence Program, which begins in 2015 and has, I think, we've had about 24 artists that are embedded into different city agencies. I will tell you that there's different cities across the world that bring artists in different capacities. The office in Mexico City, for example, they had an artist that was the chief artistic officer for the city. There's all kinds of examples. Amsterdam has an artist that's embedded in government. In California, in Los Angeles, there's writers that are embedded in city government for poetry, and um, they work through their writing inside of the system. And so there's all kinds of examples and models that exist. I think the more we can tell the story of those models, the more we can, as Amar was just saying, get folks to be like, oh my gosh, we could do that too. Yes, we can do that too. Um, I will be transparent. The allocation in New York City is kind of paltry. The program gives us about $40,000 for a year's worth of work, 20,000 for the artist, 20,000 for the project. And in my own experience working with the Civic Engagement Commission, because I think that one of the things artists bring to the fold is coming up with really good ideas for how to resolve solutions. The idea that we had was the people's buzz, and so I was able to raise $500,000 within 4 months to be able to get that funded properly and to be able to do the project as we imagined it. And I just think oftentimes the idea you can use to leverage to figure out, God, what other partners can we bring into the fold. And so I don't know where you might be, Felicity, but if in my mind to bring the examples to the folks in government that are interested in how arts and culture can transform how they work. It's always an invitation to think differently, and the more examples you have at hand, the better. So I'm happy to share more details if you want to connect.
Thank you so much, Yasmani. We have another question. Art projects can't always be quantitatively measured. What do you think funders can do to be more inclusive in their reporting requirements or the wording within their applications to not unintentionally exclude art-based projects? Hedy, I'm going to turn to you first and see if you have some thoughts from the research you've done.
Yes, I have a few thoughts about this, and I'm sure Werner and Samar might also as well. But a few things that come to the surface. One is, within, say you're funding a particular program or a partnership with I'm going to use the example of schools because of the research here. Embedding this community arts experience as part of the kind of final output is one way of just creating an opportunity for that experiential evidence to happen within a community and surrounding a community. So that's one. And utilizing things like formative assessments, the things that can document the processes, the best practices, like how we're seeing children are developing the kind of artistic skills, arts for art's sake. Are they learning the kind of artistic skills that are part of the program, for example, as opposed to are they getting better math outcomes, right? So thinking about what are ways that we can document and discuss and analyze the process versus trying to create it aligned with standardized metrics. So those are a few ways, but I'll also turn to others if anyone else wants to contribute.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from the rest of the panel?
I think this is one of the biggest question. I think it's also deeply believing it in general, experiencing it, as we just said, but also deeply listening. I think if you are in a privileged situation like we are when we are working in philanthropies, the first thing is the deep respect of the work which is happening. And that means for us, we, for instance, stopped reporting midterm reports. So we just are doing listening exercises or learning calls, which is actually interesting for both ends, and also trusting that this thing is important because it's our basic language, and not always defending. I know it's hard because very often philanthropists are still asking about these reports. Sometimes I think also we are not good in telling the story. I've started initiatives, for instance, with children, and then we would only point out that the impact on the children, but there is impact on the communities, there is impact on the parents. And parents are very interesting to ask them what has changed, and these things are important. And it's not only about figures and quantitative measures.
Thank you so much, Werner. We are almost at the end of our hour, so I just want to pass either to Samar or to Yasmani if you have any final thoughts to share before we wrap up.
Well, I'll just say that, when I think about the work of Hedy and the story we're telling today, for me, it's essential in inviting all of us into a future that's healthy and beautiful. When you can't imagine a society that's healthy and beautiful, it won't happen. And so the act of imagining begins in school and in public schools. And I think the more we can get folks to participate in their imagining of what's possible together, as they're as young people, it's critical. So I'm really grateful for our capacity to have the information that we have and to have all the case studies, actually, because I think across cultures, across language, time and again, the evidence is clear, right? Engaging with with the arts and with our creativity and with our imagination early on allows us to really think that everything can change, and I think that's essential. So thank you.
Absolutely. Samar?
And yeah, lastly, I just want even to thank everyone who's joining. And also, like as Werner said, we are heading towards a global initiative that needs everyone. We're happy if you'd like to join. We have shared our contacts in the chat. Also, if you have further questions about the report is so rich. Feel free to reach out to us, to Hedy. If you want to know more, I already saw that the chat is filled. We will look at the chat later and we will get back to you. So we will follow up for sure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone who has joined us today and been very active in the chat, sharing about both your work and how arts is a part of your work. If you found today helpful and engaging, don't forget to subscribe to Alliance, and don't worry if you missed out on the offer. We'll be sending details of that in our email to you afterwards, as well as more details about the work of the Community Arts Network. Before we close, I want to take a moment to thank the Community Arts Network for partnering with us for this event and our panelists who joined us, Werner, Samar, Hedy, and Yasmani. Alliance hosts regular webinars, and you can find out about what's coming up next by signing up to our newsletter. Thank you so much, everyone, and goodbye.